Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Dow, and I will be your host today. I am a senior writer here at the Penny Hoarder, and we are joined here. Joining with us is Erin Lowry of Broke Millennial.
Hi,
Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Today, Erin's going to be talking to us about how to navigate tough financial conversations. So, those awkward conversations that you typically try to avoid having. We're going to talk about having those conversations here today. At the Penny Hoarder, we have a mission to empower people to make smart choices about their money. And let me tell you, having these conversations with the people in your life, even if they are awkward or difficult, it's a smart money move to have. Just think about it. If you want to get a raise at work, you're going to have to sit down with your manager and have a conversation about why you deserve to have a pay increase. And if you're trying to reach a financial goal with your partner, say buy a house, you're going to have to sit down together and talk about budgeting and develop a savings plan. So it's good to have this skill of talking about money with the people in your life. At the end of our Facebook Live today, we're going to be giving away 5 copies of Erin's latest book, Broke Millennial Talks Money. Erin talks about those topics I just discussed, talking about money at work and talking about money with your significant other, in addition to many other money conversations in her latest book, Broke Millennial Talks Money. This is the third book in the Broke Millennial series, and in addition, Erin has written for publications such as the New York Times and USA Today. So we're so grateful to have her today and be answering our questions. I also wanted to let you know that we're going to be continuing the conversation around tough money talks over in our Penny Hoarder community next week. So if you're not already a member of our community, it's free to join. We'd love to have you. It's a place where we can talk about all things money, and we kind of just want to continue this conversation so that we can all be more confident about having money talks with the folks in our lives. Without further ado, I want to jump into this Q&A with Erin. Erin, again, we're so glad to have you. Um, I first wanted to know why you decided to write this book, and why is it important for folks to talk or be open to having these types of financial discussions?
In my opinion, when you think about building your financial life, we talk about a lot of the basics, right? Like my first book, it digs into all the things that are important, like understanding how to budget, credit scores, savings, paying off debt, paying off student loans, like all of those basic level money combos. Then you think about investing. We're looking to build and grow our wealth. But then I started to notice and realize that you can do everything right to build your financial house. But if you cannot communicate effectively, if you can't set healthy boundaries, if you do not know how to engage in these tough financial conversations, it's going to start to slowly crumble the foundation that is your financial house. So it's
Yeah,
critical that we learn how to navigate these awkward money conversations because they're going to keep happening through our entire lives.
yeah. Why do you think it is that it's so taboo to talk about money? It's always something that we're taught. We don't bring this up, and stay away from those kind of conversations. Why do you think it's so taboo?
Judgment. I really think that that's the word that sums it up because oftentimes we are fairly comfortable talking about it with total strangers. I've had many pre-pandemic fun conversations on the airplane with people about fundamentally their financial lives, especially when they find out what I do. And there's no risk there. I don't
Yeah,
know them. I'm probably never going to see them again. So people get really vulnerable and open. But on the flip side, my best friends, sometimes my siblings, my family members, not as willing to be open because there is this feeling of, oh, am I going to be judged? And
yeah,
I do think that's what makes people nervous. And of course, all the societal pressures of don't talk about it, it's rude, it's taboo. When oftentimes you get told that messaging, it's simply because, especially when you're a kid, your parents don't want you out on the playground sharing their business either.
yeah,
It's their right to not want everybody in kindergarten to know how much money your mom or your dad make. But,
yeah,
if you're a little kid, the easy way to kind of dismiss it is, "Oh, you don't ask about that."
yeah. And then it just kind of envelops into our psyche, and we just grow up thinking, okay, we're not going to talk about money, but it's important. It's an important topic to be able to navigate. Um, I would love to know about what should you do if you do feel confident about having a money talk with someone, but then they're very hesitant? Like, how do you approach that?
In my opinion, it depends a lot on who the person is that you're trying to initiate and why you're trying to initiate the conversation. So there's a big difference between, hey, my partner and I are getting really serious and we're about to move in together. So our financial lives, while they might not be merged right now, are going to start to impact each other. Like that is then a necessity to be having the financial conversation. But on the flip side, every so often I get messages and questions about, like, hey, my best friend's pretty crappy with money and I want to have a conversation about her with her about how to be better. Well, listen, if she doesn't come to you, if she doesn't ask, it's at the end of the day not necessarily your business to start
Mhm.
offering guidance and advice. You really do, especially with money, need to allow this to be a very collaborative conversation, something in which you kind of get invited in. Maybe you share something about your own success, and that can open the door to being asked questions to initiate more conversation. But sometimes it is very much it's not your business. And if you
Mhm.
overstep boundaries, people are also going to get uncomfortable. So you do have to figure out which version of initiation are we going through? Is this a, hey, my personal financial life is about to get impacted. We need to have a talk. Or is this like,
Mhm.
I think you're overspending based on what I'm pretty sure you make at your job. And I think you need to like join me on the personal finance train. That's going to need to be a conclusion that he or she reaches for themselves.
Yeah, we all kind of have our own opinions about what is spending too much, what is spending too little. And I love your advice about kind of offering it up first. So maybe if you have issues with your debt, you can, you know, be free to talk about that. And that might open your friend up to talking about, okay, yes, I also have debt and I am trying to figure out what's the best way to tackle that.
Absolutely, and I especially love the idea of being accountability buddies. And if
Yeah.
you're going through your own journey, and it's really important, and I know we'll dig into it a little bit later, but it's really important to also give context to people when you're saying no and declining invitations. And I do think one of the best ways is to share. Now, if you don't want to share the full debt number, that's fine,
Yeah.
that's your business, but the existence of it does provide a lot of context. So saying something along lines of, I'm trying to pay off, $500 extra in student loan payments by the end of the month because I'm really trying to pay off all my student loans in the next 3 years. You're not telling them exactly how much you have, but you're
Yeah.
speaking the existence of it, which can be really helpful for them as well. And a great way to open the door for those money conversations that you might be kind of angling to have, but
Mhm.
you don't necessarily just want to slap them across the face with the conversation if they didn't ask
Yeah.
for it.
It's a good icebreaker. Kind of on the same lines, I was wondering how do you know like you're in the right place or a right moment in your relationship to start talking about finances? Like bringing up your debt on your first date might not be a good idea, but so many couples wait until they're engaged. Some don't even really discuss money until like they're moved in together or they're married. How do you find that sweet spot of figuring out when the right time is to talk about money in a relationship?
I do think there are 2 levels of, I call it first, getting financially naked and then full just starting to date. Well, I would love if everybody on the first date were super comfortable bearing it all. It's just not realistic. But what I do want you to start to take notice of are the context clues that you're being given along the way. Comments that get made, ideas for how much you should be spending on dates, on trips together, on presents to each other, where that person lives, what kind of car they drive. All of these are giving you levels of signals about how they value things, how they spend their money, and either how much they're earning or potentially how much debt there is. One of my favorite stories in Broke Millennial Talks Money is a couple that have been together for decades. And he used a coupon on their first date. And to some women, that might have been a turnoff. But his now wife was telling me that she really loved seeing him do that because it showed to her that their value sets were really in alignment because she loved
Yeah.
using coupons as well. Now, after you get past that 101 level, it's time to do the full frontal financial nudity. And I truly believe that it needs to be well before you're engaged. But when you look at that person and think, I could spend my life with you. So whether that's marriage, whether that's committing to each other in another way, but when you realize that it's that level of serious, you need to have the full conversation. And that means sharing all of the information: salaries, credit scores, history of relationship with money, debt loads, investments, income, like absolutely everything. Doesn't have to happen all in one conversation. This can be an evolving conversation over time. But the other thing I really want you to know about your partner is there triggers when it comes to spending money, what makes them uncomfortable, what makes them want to spend, what their emotional relationship with money is, and
Yeah.
what they grew up around. Not just maybe what their socioeconomic background was, but how was money talked about and treated in their family? Because that is eventually going to rear its head in your relationship dynamic. And it's good to know your partner's triggers because one, you want to avoid pushing them. But two, if they're reacting to a situation in a way that you feel like is not proportional to what is happening, it could be because emotionally something is being triggered that's subconsciously or not reminding them of a particular level of trauma they might have experienced in their childhood or just some sort of anxiety that stems from their childhood when it comes to money.
Yeah, money and emotions are very much linked together, and having particular instances in your childhood or growing up with money that can definitely trickle down into how you treat money as a grown up. I have a question from an audience member who kind of related to the topic we're just talking about. Crystal asks, should you wait to get married when you're both in debt?
No, not necessarily. My husband had over $50,000 worth of student loans when we got married. And I'll say a couple of things. One, you need to understand the type of debt that it is and the laws of your state where you're getting married. I'm a big advocate of the prenup myself. So I do think it's really important to consider going through the prenuptial agreement process. I'm just going to soapbox here for a second on the prenup because people
Go
usually
ahead, we want to hear
get
it.
into it. And the thing I want to say about that is we truly need to reframe how we think of prenups and think of it more like marriage insurance than anything else. Because a lot of times when I say the word to people, that's a trigger of like, oh, you don't love or you don't trust your spouse or your partner. No, that's not true. Everybody has a prenup, it's the default laws of your state. If you create your own prenuptial agreement, you're basically creating a slightly different ecosystem that you feel is fair for if anything were to happen, there's now a fair and equitable division of any assets or any debts that happened before, during the marriage. Now, it's incredibly important if you're not going to have a prenup that you do understand your state laws because that is what would dictate what would happen in the case of a divorce. Now, hopefully, when you're getting married, that's not going to happen. But same as we have homeowners insurance or renters insurance and auto insurance, not because we hope that there's going to
Yeah,
be a fire or a car accident, but it could happen. Now, all that being said, if you do have debt, depending on state laws, depending on when it was created, you're not necessarily liable for your partner or your spouse's debts. So, my husband's student loans, for instance, we have paid them off. We did work together to pay them off. But if he still had those in his name and we were to get divorced tomorrow, those are not my debts. He brought them into the marriage. I never co signed on them. My name was not attached to them. So they would have remained his, and I wouldn't be responsible for them. Now, if debt gets amassed in the marriage, that can be a different conversation. So make sure you understand your state laws, but especially for us millennials, especially when we're thinking about student loan debt and like we just went through a year of a pandemic. People are going to have some credit
yeah,
card debt. Like things just happen. I do think that if you're going to wait, it could be a decade or more before you're then able to get married if you're waiting for somebody to be debt free. So that is something to consider. And the other thing, too, I don't think of debt as a red flag for a relationship. What is a red flag is how the debt is being handled today. And what I
yeah,
mean by that is if there's credit card debt from 5 years ago and you need to know why. Maybe there was a medical emergency. Maybe something happened. Maybe they just weren't good with money at that phase of their life. But now they have a plan, they're paying it off, they're going to be debt free on a certain timeline, and they haven't continued to amass debt. It's the current behavior that we want to pay attention to. Now, if
mhm,
there keeps being this cycle of creating debt, maybe paying it off and then recreating and paying it off and recreating. That in itself is a red flag. So debt isn't necessarily, but current behaviors, that's what you need to be paying attention to.
yeah. I think that's so smart to recognize. Um, Also, I would just want to add that, like when you're going into a marriage, it would be like when you're having these money talks, you want to kind of know what your partner's plan is for paying that off, and like what plan you guys want to come together and maybe and collectively pay that off. because that might affect how you spend on other things, whether you have the money to free up to go on lavish vacations or to buy a house. So, well, I am also in agreement that you don't have to wait until you're married or to pay off your debt before you get married, but it's important to be having these conversations beforehand.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of romantic relationships, I know we're kind of on the on the topic. Um, what would you say? What advice would you give about compromising in a romantic relationship when when the two people that are in the relationship have a difference of opinion? What are ways to compromise before it leads into a bigger money fight?
One of my favorite pieces of advice in the book that an expert told me was that you always hear like compromise, compromise, compromise. And yes, of course, that is true. Throughout your whole marriage, you will be compromising. But that also sometimes it's okay to let a person just take the W. And the example that she gave is, let's say that you and your husband want to buy a couch. You want to spend $3,000 on the couch. He wants to spend $1,000 on the couch. Well, okay, $2,000 would be the quote unquote compromise, meeting in the middle. Or it could be that you get to spend the $3,000 on the couch. And then at another point, he's going to get to take the win on a money conversation. Now, the underlying threat here is that you get really tit for tat with every single money decision. So you do have to be okay and learn how, within the ecosystem of your relationship and marriage, to not really go tit for tat with each other. And the other thing, too, when you're getting into a fight about money, especially with goals, or I should say with purchases that you want to make, is to come back to the original goals that you have set. And if you haven't set any as a couple, let's take a minute to do so.
Yeah.
Thinking about, what do you want this year? What do you want in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you want your future to look like? And is your money being put in alignment, whether it's into savings accounts or investment accounts, with those goals? Your goals are kind of the North Star of your entire financial plan. So anytime there is a big debate about how you're going to spend money, especially on something like housing, like, are you going to go with the more expensive one, or are you going to go with the more modest one? You need
Yeah.
to also look at how that's going to have a ripple effect on everything else you want to achieve. And that can maybe help solve the problem as well.
Cool. Good to know. Um, I know I've been spending a little bit of time about relationships, but I um, just want to reiterate that your book talks about all types of. I know relationships usually come to mind first, at least for me. But when you're talking about money discussions, it's everything from talking about money at work to talking about money with your family members and your friends. Um, I wanted to talk about family for a second. And I know that you grew up in Asia and that you know that cultural norms can play a big part when it comes to talking about money. Do you
Absolutely. First thing is, you are going to have an understanding, of course, of what your cultural norm is. And I think a great example in this conversation is that, I live in the United States today. In America, typically, if you're looking at like quote unquote American society as a homogenous group, which we're not, but if you look at it overarching, there's usually this idea that children don't necessarily live with their aging parents. They might take care of them in certain ways, but it's not necessarily a multi generational household, which is definitely the norm in other countries, that you take care of your parents as they age. Either you move in with them or they move in with you. A multi generational household is very common. And I do think it's really critical that we start to have conversations early on about what is the expectation, particularly if you are living in America and you're married to somebody who has a different cultural expectation of how to handle aging parents, or a dependent sibling, or a sick relative, or whatever the dynamic is, that you do start to have conversations about what that's going to look like in your relationship dynamic. But also, you need to talk to your parents. You need to
Yeah,
ask them early what they want. Now, for some parents, that's going to be like, well, obviously, I'm living with you. How is this even a question based on
yeah,
cultural norms? You probably already know that that's the expectation, but it's still good to have a chat about it. And for others, your parents might be really withholding. They might not want to feel like a quote unquote burden on you. They might tell you, don't worry about it. Just because they tell you that doesn't mean you're not going to worry about it. So it is really critical that you start to gather as much information as you can. Now, if you can come right out and say to your parents, hey, are you financially set for retirement? That would be great. But we know that not all parents are
exactly.
going to react well. And a big reason being that you've got, the parent-child dynamic, and you're kind of trying to subvert that dynamic and almost parent your parents. So
Yeah.
instead, I think a really easy way to start this conversation is to ask what they see their retirement looking like. And you can use a like, hey, my friend Jackie's parents just retired and moved to Florida. What are you guys thinking about? You can use a
Yeah.
personal anecdote if you want. It can be, hey, I'm just curious. Have you thought about retiring? Do you think that's something that's going to happen? And if it is, what do you think about your future? What do you want to do? Just opening the door a little bit. Over time, though, it does need to start to become more of a real conversation about the finances. And there are ways that you can pull in your own emotional reaction to the situation if you feel it would be helpful. Mom and dad, I understand that you don't feel that it's my business, that you want to take care of this yourself, but I'm never going to let you suffer. And it's really important for me and my own financial planning to understand what level of support, whether emotional, financial, or physical, you might need as you age. So it would really help me if we could sit down and have a conversation about this because, to be honest, it's causing me a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Like sometimes being just that blunt can really actually help open up, and maybe not right in that moment. It might take some time, but it can start to help to open up. The other idea that I sometimes like using is because it has worked personally in my own relationship dynamic is deploying an in law. And that is assuming that your parents, your mom, or your dad has a good relationship with that in law. But there is something to be said about somebody that your parents are really close to, that they look at as a family member, but it's not their child. And that has nothing to do with blood. That has everything to do with they didn't raise you. And therefore, it can sometimes be a little bit easier for them to talk about their mortality, which is a hard conversation to have. And we do have to acknowledge that with you as the in law, but also as a child that they love, but it's not their child. So that is another thing to consider is if all the kids are striking out, mom and dad are not engaging, see if there's an in-law or an aunt or a cousin or somebody that's super close, maybe a religious leader, a community leader, or heck, a doctor, just somebody
Yeah.
who's like, hey, I'm a little worried. Could you please encourage them to have this conversation?
Yeah. Bringing in that third party can help.
Yep.
I also love in the book how you mentioned you can kind of ease into the conversation by talking about what you might be going through as far as like your own estate planning, um, and broaching it as like, hey mom, I'm starting to develop a will. I just had my baby and I'm creating a will and trying to get my paperwork in order, um, and then kind of leading the conversation from there. Like, uh, did you come across any issues as you were navigating this situation yourself? Is this something that you've experienced already?
Absolutely. Also a good thing to do with retirement planning, but only if it's natural. Like if your
Yeah,
parents are notoriously not good with money, then don't go asking them for retirement advice because they know they can smell that. That BS detector is going
yeah,
to be going off. But you could say something along the lines of, I did just set up a 401k at work. Did you guys have a 401k or a pension, or how have you been investing for retirement? You could try that strategy.
yeah. Awesome. Speaking of retirement, I have a audience question from someone named Smith JD, and he's asking, um, "Do you plan on living overseas in retirement to save money?" He said that we referenced you living in Asia as you were a child.
I currently have no idea. I'm 31 and I don't think I'll be retiring for many, many decades. So it just really kind of depends on the landscape at that time. But there are a lot of people who do look into moving to other countries to offset cost of living. And it could also just be that maybe they're returning home, maybe they're returning to a spouse's home. And there's a multitude of reasons why you might choose to move out of the country as you age. I do think, though, that keep in mind for Americans, we are one of the few countries that does continue to tax its expatriates. So you do need to consider that within your financial plan if you plan to retain American citizenship and move overseas in retirement.
Growing up in Asia, did you find there to be a difference in cost of living, a significant difference there?
I was ages 10 to 18, and then my parents continued living there till I was 21. So hard to say because I was
Yeah,
a kid. We lived in Japan and then we lived in China. So yes, Japan is a very expensive country. China, when we were there, not nearly as expensive. So that was just in terms of retail goods, very obvious to me as a child. In
yeah,
terms though of cost of home and car and all of that, that wasn't something that I was really paying
You
all that
were
much
yeah.
attention to as a kid.
Understandably so. Um, and I wanna remind everyone to continue to ask questions. We wanna, get some audience participation um, and as a reminder, if you ask a question, you're entered into, the giveaway to get a copy of Broke Millennial Talks Money. Um, Now I wanna talk about something that I really wanna ask. How do you bounce back from a falling out with someone about money? Say you tried to approach the conversation and it didn't go so well. How do you bounce back from that?
I think it depends on how necessary, and this may sound a little harsh, it is to bounce back from it. One of the lines that one of the financial therapists in the book said, and this is pertaining to friendship dynamics, is that not everyone is a lifelong friend. And I do think that that is an important thing to consider, is that there are people that will be close friends with you through seasons of your life, but as we grow and change, some relationships just are not going to be people that you are forever close to. It doesn't mean that anytime that there is difficulty or strife, it's just like, I'm out, we're not going to be friends anymore.
Mhm.
Also not what I'm saying. But it is an important thing to keep in mind. Now, I talked about a little bit in the book, and I've talked about publicly in other interviews. I have had a falling out with somebody over what fundamentally really was a money conversation. I was a bridesmaid in her wedding, and she really went full blown bridezilla during the experience and was expecting us to shell out, I think it was like a $250 dress before alterations. We were expected to travel for the bridal shower, the bachelorette party, and the wedding itself. And I was invited to 7 other weddings that season and was in another one. And I was 26, 27 at the time. So, like, no, that wasn't going
Yeah,
to happen for me. Now, some of the fault lays on me for being like very harsh about, like, this is very expensive. I'm not going to do this. I definitely could have been more nuanced. But on the flip side, when I did try to set boundaries, it did not go well because I basically said, I cannot do all of this and pay for this bridesmaid's dress. I'm not asking you to change the dress, but between the bridal shower and the bachelorette party, which is more important for you that I attend? Because
yeah.
I can't financially afford to do both.
That
And
sounds reasonable.
I thought so. And I got some flippant responses about like weddings are important. You wouldn't know you're not married. I'm like, okay, but I've been in weddings before. Like me being in this wedding is no different than me being in another wedding. And I will say it changed a lot for how I behaved as a bride. I paid for my bridesmaids' dresses, I paid for their hair because I didn't want that to be a financial burden on them. And I also don't think that another person's life choice should be financially a big burden on you. Weddings, for those who will read the book, you will see that a lot of feelings when it comes to the wedding
Yeah,
complex because it creates so many potential tension points in many relationship dynamics, not, of course, just friendships that are tied to money, but really more tied to values. And it's this
yeah,
thought that you're expected to have the exact value alignment with somebody else because they're having a really big life experience. And of course, you want to support your loved ones, but you also shouldn't have to be spending thousands of dollars to do so. My husband and I have spent, I did the math for the book, over $20,000 attending other people's weddings. And yeah, that's a lot of money.
yeah. That brings me to another question. How do you advocate for yourself when you and, say, a friend or someone in your group, in your circle, has different values when it comes to spending money? Like maybe they don't think a $250 dress is anything, and you're saying, oh well, I actually wanted that money to save up for something entirely different. Like how do you advocate for yourself?
Well, the first thing is actually to do what you naturally just sort of started doing, which was to provide an explanation. Now, do you owe someone an explanation? No, not necessarily, but it really does if you provide help, if you provide context for why you might be saying no or pushing back. Now, the big thing is just because you have different values, it doesn't give you the right to belittle their values. So it's also not helpful to be like, listen, I just really do not value fashion the way that you're valuing fashion. So I'm not going to spend that kind of money on a dress. That's not helpful and it's rude and it's condescending.
Yeah,
So, what is important though is to say, I hear you and I really do. So, let's take weddings out of it. Let's use an example like going out to brunch.
yeah,
Bottomless brunch, it's going to cost $50. And you're like, listen, let's not. So instead, I really want to spend time with you, but I'll be honest, I don't want to pay bottomless brunch money right now because I am trying to insert thing here. Save up for a down payment, pay more on a student loan this year. We're trying to have a kid, whatever it is. Therefore, how about we grab a bagel and go for a walk in the park? Or how about you come over and I'll cook us brunch or provide some sort of alternative solution for the fact that you're saying no. Now, remember, they can go do whatever it was that they originally planned to do. Just because you're removing yourself from the equation doesn't mean that they have to adjust plans based on you and your budget. That is really important to remember. But providing that alternative, maybe you can just set up plans for another time. The other thing you can do is join later. I really love this for the whole like, birthday party, splitting the check, those like very
Yeah.
painful kind of moments when it's like, oh, do I advocate for myself or do I just get really cranky after this? One of the things you can also do happy hour beforehand, just come for one drink before, come for a dessert after, come for a drink after, but miss that bulk part that's going to cost the most amount of money and tag in either before or after so you can still kind of show face. But tell them that you're doing that ahead of time. Don't be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm pulling, and then only show up at the end for a dessert or a drink. Hey, yes, I'd love to, but I actually, and if you want to fudge and say, oh, I have other plans already, but I can come at the end, sure, you could do that. Or you could be honest and say, I want to. I want you to be able to go to whatever restaurant you pick because it's your birthday. But I'm going to be honest, that one is a little bit out of my budget. So how about I just come at the end because I don't want you to have to change your plans for my budget. And that's
Yeah,
also
and you still get to spend the time with your friend. Um, you still get to do what was most important. The being able to celebrate with your friend, but you're not necessarily tying yourself to the financial obligations that they have set.
right.
I have another question from the audience. This is about millennials. Kale asks, do you find millennials more or less fiscally responsible than other generations? This is a loaded question here.
It is a loaded question, and I do think we're a bit more values based than previous generations. I do think that we're one of the first generations to feel a little bit more, whether it's flexibility or comfort level with being able to say, like, well, I know society dictates X, but I actually prefer Y, so I'm going to spend my money on Y. I do think to a level that is because we have more opportunities and options in certain ways. We also financially have been walloped in the face quite a few times in our very young lives. And I do think it's really important to remember that just because, for example, boomers, and this is not an okay boomer moment, but this is truly to remind you that that was a completely unprecedented kind of market and a very small segment experience where today even certain jobs that were available without college degrees 30 years ago, 40 years ago, are not available today. You need a college degree for that same job. So it is really important to remember we're up against a very different set of circumstances. But I do think that there are a certain number of millennials who are really focused on spending in alignment with their values, investing in alignment with their values. Part of that's also access, particularly when it comes to investing. On the flip side, man, social media has changed the game in a lot of ways
Yeah.
too, in a way that it becomes so easy to spend your money because it's a tap of the phone away. We're getting all of these ads that are perfectly curated to us, not just things we're seeing on TV. Like this is, hey, we have been tracking how you look at things online. Here you
Yeah.
go. You're going to love this. And truly the new version of keeping up with the Joneses feels like it has pivoted to more of like the experiential type, especially pre-pandemic, and I think it'll explode post-pandemic since we've all been inside for so long.
Yeah.
But you now can see people out at restaurants, out at concerts, taking these lavish trips because they can post it on social media. Where prior, maybe you got invited over to somebody's house to like look at the slides of their trip to Greece or something like that, but you could opt out of that experience. Where now
Yeah. It wasn't right on your phone.
you're confronted with it.
Yeah, that definitely is so relevant. So true. Um, I wanna we talked about a little bit about post-pandemic life and how things are gonna change, but, Erin, do you think, since we all collectively went through so much in this past year, do you think this experience of living through the pandemic will, help people become more comfortable with talking about money?
I really do. I do feel that we certainly have had such an unprecedented experience. And unlike other recessions prior, and I'm not like throwing around the word recession for the pandemic, but like there's going to be some sort of shakeout here, that really truly most people did not have any level of personal culpability for what happened to them. You can look at prior ones, you can look at '08 and be like, well, you put 0% down on a house that went upside down. And like, you had to have known that that was not a good idea. There's some level of, we can kind of point fingers and kind of lay personal culpability at people's feet, where this is situations where you could have had your house in totally perfect financial shape, like your financial house, not your physical house. You
Mhm.
could have had 6 to 9 months, even a year's worth of emergency savings. But if you worked in an industry that got totally shuttered during the pandemic, that's not on you. And I do think that hopefully people will feel slightly more comfortable having conversations about, yeah, I went into credit card debt, or yeah, I'm behind on my bills, or my credit score took a hit, because truly it wasn't their fault in a lot of cases. So that might give us the flexibility to have less judgment wrapped up in some of these financial conversations. Because if you look at somebody who, let's say, worked on Broadway that closed in March, we're in April, over a year later. You could have a full year's worth of runway. And at this point, it's probably totally tapped or significantly tapped at this point. And it's not like you could necessarily have easily pivoted into just finding some other job either, because a lot of industries closed down and it was really hard to find other jobs at the time.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm hoping we can come away from this experience being more just forgiving for or more comfortable talking with others and like forgiving of people's circumstances because, like you mentioned, it's a lot of it has been out of our control completely, and we want to eliminate that guilt with maybe getting into credit card debt or being behind on bills. We want to not feel so guilty about this because no one could have predicted this to happen, and um, it was in out of our control for so many.
For
So
And even if you had done everything right prior, you still could have been completely leveled by this
yeah,
pandemic. And I do think that that is just such an important thing to remember, and to just give people so much grace and so much empathy through this time as well, especially as we start to get on our feet, start to get vaccines, see things get open. And like, again, the plug here, please support your local businesses and stores.
yeah, so important. I'm gonna wrap it up with one more question before we get into our book giveaway. Um, but I know the book talks a lot about having financial conversations with others, but you also mentioned having like a financial conversation with your inner self. Why is it important to have a positive money mindset?
Your life's going to be easier if you have a positive money mindset. And listen, we all have coded messages from how we were raised when it comes to money. Most people start to have their relationship to money coded between the ages of about 8 and 12, according to studies. So, whoever was raising you, that was what was getting passed down. And it can be really hard to undo some of that mindset as you age. I do this professionally, and I still have very intense scarcity mentality sometimes around my money, even though I know that is not necessarily in my best interest. But particularly as a self employed person who now just weathered a pandemic, it just kind of almost validated, like, yeah, it can go away at any moment.
Yeah,
And so you just always, and I don't want to say like always question what you believe about money. That's not what I'm trying to say, but definitely start to be a bit self reflective when you notice something financially triggering you. And that could be you don't want to spend money, or it could be you're feeling some sort of emotion and it's making you want to spend money as a way to feel better. Analyzing why you're trying to seek some sort of dopamine rush, that serotonin in that method. What maybe is that tied to with you growing up? What is it tied to with you now? And it's just really important for us to kind of excavate all of our deep rooted feelings about money so that we also can understand how and why we make decisions that we often subconsciously are making about money. Because in some cases, you almost have to set up these baby gates to protect yourself from yourself. And a really classic, easy example that I like to use here is if you're someone who anytime you log into your checking account and you see like, hey, my savings account is really starting to build up. Maybe take a little bit out today for like the thing I want to do today. It's not going to hurt it that bad. If you're
Mhm.
somebody who just constantly like skims a little off the top when it comes to your savings account, really easy solve. Put your emergency savings fund in a completely separate bank than where you do your checking. So then when you log in, A, you're not seeing it, and B, it takes a couple of days to move money over. So you can actually think through, like, okay, do I actually need this money for this compulsion that I'm feeling right now? Or should just I leave it well enough alone? The other thing, nickname your savings accounts and your checking accounts. Most banks and credit unions will allow you to change that from like account 567839 or whatever to something very specific. So it could be, honeymoon South Africa 2022. It could be quit my job with an actual date that you want to do it. Whatever it is that you want to do, put that nickname on there, because will it be a flawless way to prevent you from getting in there? No, but it does throw up an immediate reminder about why that money is there and might be a deterrent for you in the moment to pull money out.
Yeah, I think that's smart advice. It's such a simple thing to do, and but such a great reminder of, okay, I'm saving up for this specific thing. So don't take it just to, for a quick thing that you don't even need tomorrow. Well, Erin, I really appreciate you coming out, well, joining us virtually and talking to us. I hope you all in the audience have um, gotten something out of this conversation. Hopefully, you're feeling more prepared to talk to the people in your life about money, and even if it's awkward, even if it feels a little difficult at first, I empower you to pull through. And um, Erin's latest book, Broke Millennial Talks Money, is a great way to um, start to think about how to navigate these conversations. She provides various scripts that you can kind of borrow and use that as your starting point to having these conversations. Um, we are giving away 5 copies of Broke Millennial Talks Money, and um, I'm going to announce the winners of this giveaway. For those of you whose names I call, I want to for you to be on the lookout for a message from our staff. We're going to get in touch with you via private message so that we can get these books out to you. The winners today are Crystal Dondiva Smith, Karen Michelle, Smith JD, Charlene May Reyes, and Kale McKenzie. Congrats for all of you, and thank you so much. Thanks so much for everyone for joining us and participating and asking questions. Again, I hope that this helps you in your life with when it comes to talking about money, with whether it's your boss, whether it's your significant other, whoever you need to have money discussions in your life. Erin, I'd love for you to let us know where we can find you and Broke Millennial and the book.
Well, you can find the books, all 3 of them, wherever books are sold. Also, if you don't have it in your budget to buy books right now, please check out your local library. And if they don't have it, just request it. You can find me on Instagram at Broke Millennial Blog, on Twitter at Broke Millennial, and the website is brokemillennial.com. It was so wonderful to be here today with all of you, and thank you for tuning in.
And thank you. It was awesome to have you here today. I want you all to be sure to also check out the pennyhoarder.com and to join our community group where we'll be discussing, continuing this discussion about tough money talks. And please sign up for our newsletter. We have a daily newsletter where you get all our latest articles and you'll get more tips on money and announcements for virtual events such as this one. Thank you again for joining us. We hope that you have a great week, rest of your week, and until next time, bye.